So we just finished 9-8 in our first ever season with the Commanders as their GM, and we also managed to get a playoff game. We unfortunately didn't win it against the Atlanta Falcons. Taking a look here at just a quick recap of the last episode, the Kansas City Chiefs ended up beating the Dallas Cowboys in the Super Bowl 48-20. Patrick Mahomes was the Super Bowl MVP. Joe Burrow was the MVP of the league, while Kyle Shanahan was the Coach of the Year. Brandon Ayuk was Offensive Player of the Year. Max Crosby was the Defensive Player of the Year. Travis Stewart and Aaron Clifford were the respective Offensive and Defensive Rookies of the Year. Both arguably getting it above our guys. Definitely the Defensive Player of the Year award over Moody. That's one of those ones where we're kind of looking back at going, that should have been ours. And it's a little bit upsetting that we didn't get it. But nonetheless, moving forward into year number 2. So as a nice little refresher of the draft class as we get into this, because we will be doing the draft, free agency, and the regular season as we typically do in each of these videos. Just taking a look here at the first round, we'll ultimately get to see finally what our pick is going to be. Unfortunately, since we did make the playoffs, we ultimately thought we were going to be a top 5 team. We're actually going to have the 21st team, and they're going to have us selecting middle linebacker Alex Phelps. I don't really think that's what we're going to ultimately go for, but very much good to know where we are at this point. So now taking a look here at our free agents, Derek Forrest is available, Benjamin St-Juste, he's there, Brown, Crowder, pardon me, Maurice Hurst, which was a guy that we initially brought in, and ultimately he didn't see the field too much because of our rookies that we ultimately got. Charles Leno Jr., he is going to be a free agent, definitely going to be a guy that we're going to hope to try to replace. Kyle Fuller, definitely getting up there in age, and now only 72 overall. Connor McGruven, definitely going to try to keep an eye on him in free agency just to see, but one of the guys we are going to bring in is Steve Stanley. We're going to try to bring him back. He's a top 10 fullback in the NFL currently, so might as well. And he ultimately indeed signed it. It's realistically going to be him. I'm not really going to look at Tress Way just because he's not that great of a punter, but the only other guy that I'm really worried about re-signing is Derek Forrest, just because he does have that 81 overall. He's 26, so he's kind of that prime age, and he unfortunately only has that normal dev trait. So if we can get him to a 2-year deal, that's going to be relatively nice. So if we can sign him to a 4-year, so $16 million contract, he's happy to stay with us. Pretty much here at the moment, no one else I'm really going to consider keeping on this team. So for our first little round of the actual free agent period, we're going to go big into Creed Humphrey, possibly the best available free agent. We're definitely going to be in one of those situations where we're just going to kind of hope that we get him. Wyatt Teller, again, we're really just trying to upgrade this offensive line as best as we possibly can. Stephen Gilmore, just to kind of help out some of that secondary. He does have that mentor trait as well, which is going to be huge for our 2 young defensive backs, and potentially if he starts to really ball out for us, we might potentially be able to trade him away. Ryan Stonehouse is another guy that I'm looking to bring in. Obviously we need a punter, best available punter, and he's 26 years old, so it's kind of fitting the same timeline that we have for Cameron Dicker as well, so very good. And then I'm also thinking about trying to bring in Khalil Mack opposite of Moody, just because we didn't really get the production that we really wanted to from Huff, and he does have that mentor trait, so ultimately going to help out. Let's see how many of these guys that we get. So for us, we ended up getting Wyatt Teller, Stephon Gilmore, pardon me, Ryan Stonehouse, and Khalil Mack. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised that's where it ultimately went. Creed Humphrey ends up going to the Falcons. 3-year, 9.66 salary, a $32 million bonus, so they really went after him. Funny enough, Kendall Fuller, the guy that we traded away last offseason, he is he was available. I just didn't really want to bring him back because it kind of felt a little bit cheap almost, but gonna be big. I looked at Brian Burns as well, but unfortunately I felt like he was just gonna cost a little too much money for us. But Tua Tagovailoa, he's going to go to the Tennessee Titans. Funny enough, that is where we traded Sam Howell to last offseason, and they decided to go big into Tua, and just not really looking good for that young man. And not Tua, but Sam Howell. So pretty much the only free agent that I was really considering going in, we do have $35 million left in cap space, but I really don't want to blow it on guys that we could potentially only get for a season. So I'm trying to find some cheaper deals, but McGruven, again, if we can get him back, and just taking a look here, if we ultimately do, and we did, you coming back for that $6 million contract for that one season, going to be fairly nice for us moving forward. And right now, I feel like I'm probably just going to go into the draft process just because I'm not really looking at this free agency class as anything more. There might be one guy that I'm going to take a look at here in the future just to see if we can get him potentially really, really cheap moving forward, but it's going to be interesting to say the least. So with the first pick in the draft, the New York Giants select Jamie Quincy, outside linebacker, edge rusher, realistically, from Utah. Definitely going to try to get their edge rusher of the future. I can't remember what they did in last year's draft, if they decided to go for quarterback or whatnot, but a new edge rusher joins our division. And with the second pick, the Las Vegas Raiders select Lance Rodriguez from Notre Dame, likely also an edge rusher to pair with Max Crosby. So the Raiders add a little bit more pass rush, but we are going to move over to our pick next. So for us, before we actually make our pick, we are ultimately going to make a draft day trade that's going to get us the Giants' second round pick, and we are sending away Bryce Huff, ultimately because we found a replacement for him in Khalil Mack, and we're going to send a 2025 fourth and a 2027 seventh round pick. Ultimately, this is going to help us get probably the two players that I'm looking at right now that I'm really, really intrigued in. You'll get to see both because they're essentially both going to be first round picks because the Giants is pick number 33, but the next time you'll see me and hear me is when we make our picks. So for our first pick, 21st overall in the draft, we are selecting Mike Inzerma, left tackle in this draft, 60 or 6'6", 324 pounds, 22 years of age, hidden dev trait. Looking at some of his skill, he has that A awareness, impact block, lead block is a B, pass block is a C, but he also has that run block at a B for the most part. Ultimately, I think this is going to be a good left tackle for us moving in the future and a hell of a lot cheaper. So normally I don't like to show picks, but unfortunately Rob Stark, the center from Oklahoma, was the guy that I was looking at, and I San Francisco 49ers pick him up. That ultimately was the guy that I was taking a look at. So there goes kind of my plan, ultimately trading up and giving some picks away. Probably shouldn't have done it as soon as I did. Ultimately, I probably could have saved myself, but them be the draft. So our next pick in the draft, the one that I was hoping to use on that center, I ultimately decided to go with Reggie Griffin with this pick. Just because, you know what, I don't think corner is our top need, but it's one of those players that I looked at and said, you know what, I feel really comfortable about. He has that B man coverage, A press, and B zone coverage. Some of those things, I'm like, that is very, very good for coverage, especially early on in the second round. So the last pick of this particular draft that I'm going to show you until it's all complete and finished is middle linebacker Alex Phelps. He was a guy that I had an eye on pretty much throughout most of the year, and he just so happens to be a hidden dev trait. Middle linebacker, not necessarily a position of need, but always good to start building some depth when we can. So potential if we want to move on from Barton, and depending on how good overall he is, this could be a really decent pickup for us. So we're taking a look here at the top players in the draft at where they were drafted. Jamie Quincy as a 74 overall, but who was ultimately the best player in the draft happens to go to Sidney Bardell, who was a corner at 77, and then Reggie Griffin, actually one of our guys, the guy that we drafted, also happens to be 77 overall corner. So we got the tied for the best player in the draft. That's actually kind of insane. Kevin Joseph, Manny Werner. But let's actually now take a look at our team. So Mike Inzerma, he is a 74 overall. Reggie Griffin, Phelps is a 71. This guy in the third round, Ricky Northrup, he is a 72. Also has that hidden dev trait. And then the final three picks, I just kind of threw a couple safeties here, but Carlos Washington, 65 overall, he does have that hidden dev trait, so he's going to be a guy that we're definitely going to keep on the team. He's a receiving back, so maybe a guy that could potentially be something for us in the future, but ultimately us getting the tied for the best player in the draft with Reggie Griffin is absolutely going to be huge. The only problem is that he does have that normal dev trait, so he's not really going to improve much unless we can get him that boost, but ultimately he's expected to be our fourth corner so far this year unless we ultimately just decide to go and change something. So ultimately not going to be sad about this whatsoever. All right, now officially taking a look at the depth chart as we get into the season. Our first round pick in Zerma, he is actually a star dev trait, so that actually is showing that we have a couple of guys. And then Northrup, he is going to be an eventual starter potentially after Wyatt Teller is gone. I believe it's a 2-year contract, but still, this is our offensive line starting to look better. Definitely going to need some upgrades in the center position, and then hope our tackles pan out. A phenomenal tight end who's young. He's now up to a superstar. Our quarterback Klein, he's still remaining a superstar. Obviously Terry McLaurin, superstar X Factor, and then we have 2 stars in Dotson and Hunt. So far, right now, our offense looking a little bit better than what it was last year. Our offensive line potentially taking what could seem to be a little bit of a step back just because of how young it is. Our interior is definitely the strength of the O-line with our 2 guards, but it is going to be a work in progress probably for the next couple years, I'm going to have to imagine. But now taking a look here at our defense, obviously Emerson and Forbes are going to be our 2 main guys. Gilmore is going to be our third, and then Griffin is actually going to be our starting slot corner because I really want to play him because he seems to be so good. Meadows down the middle with Payne, Mack and Moody are going to be doing great things there, and Cody Barton again, he does have that normal Jordan Brooks, but Phelps, he's going to get his turn eventually down the road. Davis and Isaiah Simmons are both going to hold that. Our linebacking situation looks really, really good. Our safety situation looks really, really good. I'm really liking the way this defense is starting to pan out. Obviously, just going to be a lot of growing and a lot of development. Our special teams, again, Stonehouse and Eric Dicker are the main guys. Then looking at our specialists, like I said, the main one that I was really going to be focusing on is Griffin getting that slot over a guy like Martin or Emmanuel Forbes. But that is it. And so pretty much that is what the team is going to look like so far this year. The only time we're really going to stop is for important events. We're going to likely see you back at week 4 or like in episode 1 every single time that we get a win. I'm probably going to try to keep whenever we get a win and do those a little bit quicker than the last video just for my own sake. But nonetheless, we'll see you when we see you. So already in week number 1, we have our first victory. This time it was against the Detroit Lions, 28-17. They got more yards just barely on the offensive side of things, 351 to 342, a little bit more in the passing and rushing game, so it seemed fairly close throughout the entire game. But let's take a look here at the personal stats. Lance Klein, he got that 1 passing touchdown, so did Jared Goff, but Jared Goff got sacked and Klein did not. But just taking a look here at the Commanders, Brian Robinson Jr. with the 3 touchdowns on the day with 97 rushing yards. The offensive line does appear to have helped him out a little bit. I know last season he was rushing on an average of like 75, so this is really good to see. Taking a look at our offense, Terry McLaurin doing Terry McLaurin type things, 102 yards off of 4 catches. Jahan Dotson, again, he was kind of our main touchdown recipient last season. I think he had 8, if I'm remembering correctly. So him finding the end zone, not really a shock. Luke Hunt, and Oquanco, pardon me. I'm definitely going to mess that name up multiple times throughout the series. Again, no sacks given up by our offensive line. Jermaine Davis led the team in tackles, and QB sacks was Khalil Mack, the guy that just ended up bringing in. So, taking a look at our second win of the season, unfortunately, it came in week 4. So now we are 2-2 on the year, but we ultimately were able to beat the Minnesota Vikings 31-28. The Vikings got more yards on the ground, but we got more yards throughout the air, and they had just a little bit more. Actually, funny enough, only 4 more yards. So let's take a look here at the player stats. Lance Klein, 3 passing touchdowns to 1 interception. Sam Howell, our former quarterback last year before we actually drafted Klein, ultimately traded him to the Titans. He had to find a third home in just 2 seasons, had 2 for 1. Ultimately, Klein outperformed him in this particular game, and so it's always good to see. But let's take a look at the rest of the stats. Brian Robinson Jr., 68 rushing yards, but Will Blackman actually getting the 1 rushing touchdown on the day for us. So taking a look at the receiving, Terry McLaurin, actually something that he struggled with last year was finding the end zone, had 98 yards and 2 TDs, but Jahan Dotson, again, almost seems so reliable in the receiving game. Brian Robinson Jr., 5 catches, 33 yards, so he was actually a little bit effective in there. Oquanco, he got 73 yards. He's just been such a gem for us. I'm so happy we traded him for Sam Howell. What a move that was. Taking a look at the blocking, no sacks given up. Jermaine Davis had 7 tackles. Taking a look at the sacks, Leslie Moody and Justin Meadows, our 2D tackles from last year, both in that second round, getting after the former quarterback. The 1 interception, Reggie Griffin, our rookie, ultimately getting it back. Did this end up getting a touchdown? No, he did not. But we are going to take a look here at actually our schedule. And, we faced off against the Panthers 24-21, came very close. And then the Cowboys ultimately looking at us from last year, saying, you know what, we're just going to get a little bit of revenge, beating us 21-10. So now let's take a look at the stats so far through the first 4 weeks. So taking a look at Lance Klein, 6 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, kind of going at a 63% completion rate, 935 yards. He has been sacked 4 times, so essentially once per game. We're not going to be too upset with that. Brian Robinson, 276 rushing yards with the 5 rushing touchdowns. Dude is an absolute animal. Love to see it. Then taking a look at our receiving game, Terry McLaurin just absolutely lighting it up. The 2 TDs. Jahan Dotson also performing very well. Luke Hunt, maybe just taking a little bit of a backseat behind Oquanco. Brian Robinson, our 5th leading receiver on the team. Really going to be interesting, but taking a look at the actual sacks given up, Mike Inzerma, again, he's that rookie left tackle. We're going to have to kind of expect some of these high numbers. Hopefully that just doesn't ultimately damage his confidence too much. The 3 sacks so far this year. Everyone else appears to be doing fairly well, especially Chris Nix, our other first round tackle that we drafted last year. So he's performed fairly well, and Sam Cosmi, unfortunately, has given up a sack so far this year. Looking at the defensive side of the ball, Davis leading the team in tackles for loss. Khalil Mack is tied with Moody with 4. And Khalil Mack is leading the team in 2.5 sacks. Moody and Meadows actually tied for the moment with 1.5. Take a look at the interceptions. Reggie Griffin, funny enough, has 2 already on the year, and Jordan Brooks only has the 1. Maybe we might be having an emerging superstar coming with us sooner rather than later. So we have our first win in 3 games. We currently went on a 3-game losing streak. We were able to beat the New England Patriots 24-6, having ourselves finally a comeback game. And we're actually going to be able to take a look at a bunch of stats right here. But the Patriots outgained us in offense, 321 to 287. We had more rushing yards than they did, not as many passing yards. Just taking a look here, Lance Klein had the 2 passing touchdowns to no interceptions, was only sacked the 1 time. Mac Jones, 246 yards through the TD, had the 1 interception, but was sacked a, a massive 4 times in this one. But taking a look at the rest of the team, Brian Robinson, 99 yards. Will Blackman with another touchdown on the year. I know we only got the 1 last season, so he's getting a little bit more work. Good to see. Taking a look at the receiving game, Jahan Dotson had 63 receiving yards and no touchdowns. Terry McLaurin, the 1 touchdown, and Trent Cox, funny enough, our rookie tight end before we traded for Okonkwo. This was supposed to be potentially our guy of the future, and he ultimately gets the touchdown. I think that's his second of the year, possibly. We're going to have to ultimately see. Taking a look at our blocking, Sam Cosmi, again with another sack. Going to be interesting to see. Jermaine Davis, 10 leads the team in tackles, also got a half sack, but Isaiah Simmons with a sack and a half in this game, Khalil Mack with a sack, and Jermaine Davis, Cody Barton, and Leslie Moody with it. And then the interception getter was Isaiah Simmons. He absolutely feasted in this week. No defensive touchdowns, but actually just taking a look at our schedule pretty much after week 4, ended up losing to the Eagles 35-25. Lost to the Bears 31-17, and then we had such a close revenge game of 31-30 against the Cowboys, and now we go off and beat the Patriots. But now let's take a look at the team's stats so far this year. Taking a look at Lance Klein, 15 passing touchdowns to 10 interceptions, 63% completion. Not necessarily what we want to see all that much. The 12 sacks on the year, still a fairly low amount, to be perfectly honest with you. Want to see Lance keep that ball protected a little bit more. We did see this a bunch last season, but around this time he also really picked it up and really took off. I think at this point he was 7 for 7 after 8 games in last season, and then he ultimately just exploded and protected the ball later down the stretch. But he's definitely going to need to do that if this team is going to have hopes of making it back to the playoffs. Taking a look at Brian Robinson, 560 yards, 7 TDs, so he didn't really get into the end zone all that much over the last couple weeks. That might be another big reason of why this team isn't necessarily winning, is Brian Robinson wasn't getting into the end zone as much. Taking a look at the receiving, Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson are both tied for the same amount of receptions. Terry McLaurin has 2 fewer yards, but Luke Hunt also very close there, so it's being spread out a lot. But Luke Hunt leading the team in touchdown receptions. Cox, I was correct, he does have those 2 receiving touchdowns this year. Taking a look at the sacks, Mike Inzerma, we again kind of said we kind of got to expect this for the year, just kind of roll with the punches. Sam Cosmi, again, we're paying him a bunch of money. We don't really want to see all those sacks being given up. Chris Nix, only the 2, so for a first-time starter, he's also doing fairly well. And Connor McGovern doing that, but Wyatt Teller, absolutely stud so far this year. No sacks allowed. Jermaine Davis leads the team in 58 tackles. And then looking at the sacks, Khalil Mack with 7 already on the year, and Moody with 5, Deron Payne and Meadows both with 2.5. Taking a look at this, Reggie Griffin still leads the team with 2 interceptions, and we're seeing Emerson Jr. get his first interception, and Emmanuel Forbes doesn't really have any interceptions so far this year. Taking a look at our kicking, Cameron Dicker, 6 for 7, 22 for 22 on the extra points. So pretty well. The next time you'll see us is for wins, or once we get to the end of the season, if we don't win any more games. Hopefully we can go on a nice little winning streak and potentially sneak into the playoffs. So we officially have back-to-back wins for the first time this season, where we beat the Las Vegas Raiders 31-28 in an absolute barn burner of a game. They or outgained us on the offense, 390 to 340. We definitely outrushed them. But taking a look at the player stats here, Baker Mayfield had 331 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns. Andy Dalton actually came into the game at some point and had 1 passing touchdown, but Lance Klein, he had 224 for 1 touchdown, but no sacks were given up. We actually got after Baker for 4 sacks, so that's pretty decent. Taking a look at the rushing game, finally Brian Robinson Jr. getting back into the end zone with 83 rushing yards. Okonkwo, he got 111. He's just been a phenomenal tight end. Terry McLaurin getting the touchdown, and kind of up and down for Hunt this year. Jahan Dotson, still same thing. No sacks were given up by us. Curl with leading the team with 5 tackles, so a lot of kind of getting after it. And then for the sacks, Leslie Moody with a sack and a half alongside with Daron Payne. And then Khalil Mack also generated a sack. No interceptions on the day. So our first player that we re-signed this year, the first time I actually ended up looking, I didn't realize how many good players that we've had that we need to re-sign, but Terry McLaurin was one of them, and it was easy to give him pretty much easy contract. He's going to stay with this team. 90 overall, no problem whatsoever. Terry McLaurin is not going anywhere. Next up is Martin Emerson, the guy that we traded for. We ended up signing him to a 6-year deal. Again, we really want to lock this guy up. Superstar, easily the best corner. And with our young corner unit, honestly, it's easy to sign him long term. Only 24 years old. Easy, easy, easy. Okonkwo was another guy that we needed to re-sign, signed him to a 5-year deal. Again, these 25-year-olds, we're keeping these guys long term. We really want to keep these guys here for a while, and you know what? Getting him another no-brainer sign. Jermaine Davis is going to remain with the team. The 26-year-old is going to be locked up for the next 3 years. Honestly, I didn't realize how big this free agency class was going to be. Luckily for us, we had $90 million, but he is staying with this team. Brian Robinson, signing him to a 2-year extension, getting him locked up. He has just been an absolute workhorse for us on offense, and we're not paying him too crazy amount either. So overall, I gotta say I'm really happy with the players that we are able to keep on this team. Make that 3 wins in a row for the Washington Commanders. We were able to beat our divisional rival, the Philadelphia Eagles, 38-31, having a really close game. And for the first time that we've actually been able to see, we outgained our opponent on the offensive side of things with 368, and they outrushed us, but we outpassed them. But taking a look at the passing stats, Andy Dalton again in the game threw for a passing touchdown, and Lance Klein, when he was in there, had 3 passing touchdowns for 269, no interceptions. That's really, really good to see the lack of interceptions. But Jalen Hurts, he was sacked once, 231 passing yards, 2 TDs and an interception. And so for us, looking fairly good. But taking a look, Brian Robinson again, we just signed him, 75 yards, 1 touchdown. And then looking at the receiving, Luke Hunt having a massive game, 114 yards, 2 TDs. Jahan Dotson also got another TD. Just taking a look here, can't find who got the 4th TD in this particular game. Maybe it was only 3. Doesn't really matter. But Okonkwo, again, after he also signed 78 yards. Love having this guy around. No sacks given up, and Emerson Jr. leading the team in tackles. Again, he's also signing that paycheck as well. Justin Meadows getting his sack, and then Emmanuel Forbes getting his first interception on the year. Another big time win for us in the regular season, this time beating the Giants, who we know had that first overall pick. We outgained them on the offense. Taking a look here, and Nielsen, not their first, or he was their first pick in last year's draft, 300 or 294 yards, just shy under 300, 3 passing touchdowns, the 1 interception to 2 sacks, but nowhere even close to Klein, 387 passing yards, the 5 touchdowns, and no sacks. My goodness, Brian Robinson actually was allowed to take a little bit of a day off, it almost seemed like. 15 rushing yards, 42 uh, or 15 rushing attempts, 42 rushing yards. Taking a look, Luke Hunt, back-to-back weeks having unbelievable games. That's 3 touchdowns. Terry McLaurin having himself a decent game. Okonkwo getting 74 and 1. And then taking a look here at Cox, also getting his 3rd touchdown on the year, I believe. The no sacks coming our way. That's just epic to see. Isaiah Simmons with the 8 tackles. Khalil Mack leads the team, and the only person to get sacks, he got 2. And then for interceptions, Emmanuel Forbes with back-to-back. So one thing I'm not going to forget to do this year is I'm actually going to make sure and look where we are if we are in a playoff hunt, and currently we are in the playoffs, and if it stayed the exact same, we'd be going up against the team that eliminated us from the playoffs last year, the Atlanta Falcons. So, again, something to keep an eye on. Obviously, we want to keep this winning streak up. The Chiefs and the Packers are currently the number 1 seeds. So we were officially put in the gauntlet. The last time that I talked to you, we were looking at the playoff standings, and that we saw that the Packers and the Chiefs were the number 1 seeds. Last week we faced the Packers, ended up losing 20-17 in a really close game, and then we had to go up against the other number 1 seed, and the Kansas City Chiefs were 11-1 at this point in the year, and we ultimately were able to beat them in this game. Just absolutely massive for us. Let's take a look at the stats. Lance Klein, a passing touchdown and an interception. Patrick Mahomes with the 1 passing touchdown. But the big thing here is we were able to get after him 7 times. That is insane to think about. So Klein maybe not having the best day out there, but he was able to do enough. But Stanley, our fullback, getting a touchdown. Brian Robinson also getting a touchdown with 71 rushing yards. Luke Hunt, again, just continuing to have really, really strong performances. 79 receiving yards. Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson are kind of looking back at the moment going like, all right, at least Terry McLaurin is getting some of these touchdowns. No sacks given up to us. But the big thing here, I'm not even going to look at everything else. Khalil Mack with 2.5, Deron Payne with 2, Jermaine Davis with a sack and a half, Leslie Moody with 1, and no interceptions were there on the day. So just an absolute monster of a day for Khalil Mack and the rest of this D-line. So after the last 2 weeks, we are now officially up into 6th, which is good because I thought that loss definitely would have dropped us. It might have actually dropped us out of the playoff race. I didn't look, so I just decided to take a quick peek here, but we'll continue on. So we have back-to-back wins here. This time we ended up beating the Los Angeles Rams and beating them pretty handily, 34-17. Taking a look at the player stats, Lance Klein, 3 touchdowns, the 2 interceptions, and Dylan Watkins with 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. So clearly another draft pick from Klein's draft. Don't really notice him, but so a little bit not really taking care of the ball. We got the 5 sacks and the 2 sacks coming our way, so it's going to be fun to see Brian Robinson with the 72 rushing yards, Blackman getting his 3rd likely touchdown of the year, Okonkwo getting the 2 TDs and the 52 yards, Luke Hunt, McLaurin both with 44, and Jahan Dotson also getting himself into the end zone. Who gave up the sacks in this one? Wyatt Teller and likely someone else, or it's probably just going to be that, but Khalil Mack, oh my goodness, what a signing this has been for us. He ended up getting 4 sacks on the day, while also Deron Payne getting another one. Just an absolute monster year for Mr. Mack so far. Taking a look at the interceptions, Davis, Forbes, and Emerson. So we'll take a look at our next week. So we ultimately ended up beating the New York Giants. They definitely outgained us in this one. The game was fairly close, 35-31. 503 yards gained to our 371. My goodness, let's take a look here at the stats. Nielsen, again, throwing the 2 touchdowns and interception, was sacked twice. Klein actually had the 2 interceptions, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, and was also sacked twice. Brian Robinson, the 2 touchdowns on the ground, and Stanley also getting another one from his fullback position. Terry McLaurin with 119 and 1 receiving touchdown. Jahan Dotson also getting a receiving touchdown. Taking a look here, Wyatt Teller and Connor McGovern getting those 2. So Wyatt Teller, after having a pretty good year, gives up a sack finally. Taking a look here at our defense, our 2 sack getters, Leslie Moody and KJ Henry, one of our, I guess, backup defensive ends, getting in there a little bit of playing time and ultimately getting the sack. And then looking at Martin Emerson Jr. getting the interception. Currently looking at the playoff picture after the last couple of weeks, we are still in 6th place, likely going to be facing off against the Falcons yet again, potentially in the playoffs. That should be oh so interesting. The Packers and the Chiefs still at the top of the board. We ended up beating the Chiefs, but we weren't able to quite beat the Packers. Continuing on with this big winning streak, we end up going up against the 4-win Denver Broncos and handling them pretty nicely, winning this game 24-10. Taking a look here at the stats, Jared Burton, their new starting quarterback. They also have Jameis Winston and Trevor Lawrence on this team as well. So interesting to say the least, but Jared Burton, no touchdowns, no interceptions, was sacked 3 times. Lance Klein was sacked once, had the 252 yards and the 2 TDs. Then taking a look here at the Commanders, Blackman getting another touchdown. So it's good to see him get in there, because this was a guy that we ultimately drafted. I think it was the 7th round in our first year. So he's starting to put together some numbers. Luke Hunt again with just a monster day, 129 receiving yards, 2 TDs. Terry McLaurin 65, excellent there. Sack who wasn't given up, no one on our offensive line. And then taking a look at our sacks, Jermaine Davis, Deron Payne, Moody, and Mack getting there for 1, no interceptions given. Also, a fun side note as well, as I was going through the news, it also stated that we have officially clinched the playoffs. Just to also confirm it, the Packers at 11-5, the Cowboys 11-5, the Falcons are 11-5, and we're 10-6. So theoretically, we could potentially be the first seed in the NFC if we get a win and all these teams lose ahead of us. Going to be really interesting, but nonetheless, back-to-back playoff years. We're currently on a 4-game win streak. I think the Packers might hold the advantage over us. I think the Cowboys would also hold an advantage over us, but still, if we can get a win and be at least, if all these other teams lose, on par with them, that is going to be huge for this team moving forward. So our final game of the year to get our 5th win in a row, we ultimately go out there and beat the Los Angeles Chargers, getting what looks to be a last-second field goal in the game, winning 20-17. Taking a look at this team, Justin Herbert threw 3 interceptions in this game and was sacked once, and Klein unfortunately not getting a touchdown or an interception, and also was sacked the one time, having the lowest number of yards in a game I think we've ever seen from him at 116. Was a very low completion percentage at 52 as well. So it's definitely a defensive win for us. Brian Robinson, the 2 TDs on the ground, he definitely helped out. What's without a doubt the 49 yards. Again, no one really had a special day in the air. Wyatt Teller again giving up that sack. That's going to hurt his Pro Bowl potentials. But looking at it here, Jermaine Davis and Deron Payne tying for a sack. But Davis, Emerson Jr., and Jordan Brooks all getting the interceptions. So before we get to any of the playoff stuff, as I should say, let's take a look here at some of the yearly stats, because we are officially past week 18. Lance Klein, 4,160 yards, breaking that 4,000 mark. 33 touchdowns to 14 interceptions. by our 8th game of the year, he had 15 passing touchdowns and 10 interceptions, so he cleaned it up massively throughout the year. Would like to see the passing completion be a little bit better, but I'm not going to be too overly picky. He was sacked 25 times this year, so again, still a fairly decently low number. Taking a look at our rushing, Brian Robinson again had himself a very nice year, the 15 rushing touchdowns. Will Blackman with the 4 rushing touchdowns, and Stanley with the 2. Looking at our receiving, Luke Hunt actually led the team pretty much in all categories, in catches, in receiving yards, and in touchdowns, surprising over Terry McLaurin and Okwanku. But Jahan Dotson, 834 yards, the 6 touchdowns, and Trenton Cox with the 3 receiving touchdowns as well. Taking a look here at our blocking, in Zerma with 8. Wyatt Teller, who at the halfway mark of the season had none, now had 7, so he just completely fell off the map halfway through the year. Just taking a look at his card, he's still an 88 overall. He's a superstar, so I had no idea what happened there. Cosme with the 3, Nix with the 3, and McGurven with the 2. So really interesting to say the least what happened there. Jermaine Davis led the team in tackles, the only player on our team to get over 100. Taking a look at tackles for loss, Khalil Mack, and as you can currently see here, more importantly, he leads the team in tackles for loss with 18 sacks. Leslie Moody right behind him with 15 and 10. So Moody, a guy that we drafted in the 2nd round as a defensive tackle and moved him to edge rusher, now officially has the 10 sacks on a year, double digits. Great to see Deron Payne with the 8.5, and Meadows, again, he's a run blocker getting those 3.5. But taking a look here, Emerson with the 3, Davis with the 4, Forbes with 3, and Reggie Griffin, who ultimately led the team at the halfway point of the year, had to, so he definitely quieted down a little bit, but still a good rookie year. Let's see, did we have any defensive touchdowns? We did. Martin Emerson was the only one. Final thing before we get into the playoff game and the schedule, Cameron Dickerson very much having a better year. He was at like 73% at the end of last year, and he put that up to 93 and was perfect on extra points. That's exactly what you like to see. So here is the official playoff bracket. The New York Jets actually moved up into first place in their division, and so did the Dallas Cowboys. So the Chiefs and Packers final week of the season, honestly, we kind of got fairly close there. We were in 5th position, so with the wild card behind the Cowboys, unfortunately. But yeah, this is what we're going to do. We're going to be facing off against the 4th seed Arizona Cardinals, who likely just won their division to get here. But this is going to be interesting. So, in our 2nd year as a general manager, we have won our first playoff game. And as you saw there, it was pretty close up into the 2nd. And then we just completely took off going into the 4th quarter. And again, Eric Sherman was drafted ahead of Lance Klein. So these two guys constantly going up against each other. Klein, the 231 passing yards out past Sherman. Sherman did get the 1 passing touchdown, and unfortunately for Klein, he didn't get a passing touchdown or an interception. Rushing, we're just going to take a look here at our team. Brian Robinson, again, was just an absolute monster. The 2 rushing touchdowns, all of our touchdowns came on the ground. Will Blackman and Stanley both getting their receiving yards. Luke Hunt, again, our top receiver this year. There's no other better way to put it. He was just phenomenal. He got the most amount of yards, but tied for the 2nd amount of catches and sacks. In Zerma with the 1 sack on the game, the lone sack against us. And then taking a look at our side, Khalil Mack, who else? Curl, Davis, and Moody all getting a sack there in this particular game, but Khalil Mack doing great work. No interceptions on the game, but hey, folks, we've won a playoff game. So now taking a look at the rest of the playoff schedule, again, I'm not really going to go through too much of them, but just know that these are all the games, and we are actually going up against the Minnesota Vikings, who beat the Atlanta Falcons, who ultimately bounced us in the wild card round in last year. So this is going to be a close game, and Panthers are able to beat the Packers, so that's good to see. Me hating the Packers, never want to see them succeed, but let's see what we can do against this Minnesota Vikings squad. So unfortunately, we could not get the win in what was a very close game. Sam Howell looking at us saying, "You guys should have kept me instead of drafting Klein. I would have won the playoff game as I did here today." He got the 285 passing yards, the 2 TDs, completed 83% of his passes, while Klein 335 passing yards, only 69% completion, the 2 passing touchdowns, and the interception. So unfortunately for us, our season comes to an end, and Brian Robinson had the fumble in the game as well. Didn't necessarily have the most yards that we've ever seen from him. Taking a look, Luke Hunt, absolutely machine. Terry McLaurin also having a great game with the 2 TDs in this one. Taking a look, sacks, Matt Inzerma with the 3 sacks on the game, Nix with 2, and then Northrop, our backup guard, had a sack go against him. So we had 6 sacks against us in this game. And then taking a look, did we get pressure on Sam Howell? We did. Isaiah Simmons with the sack and a half. So that's 2.5, 3.5. That's 4, and then a total of 5. So this was a sack heavy game. Unfortunately, did not get an interception, and that is gonna be our season, but we'll still have some stuff to do before we end the video. So taking a look here at the divisional, or pardon me, the championship round, it is the Cowboys taking on the Vikings, and it's going to be the Chiefs taking on the Texans. Can we see a rematch of last year's Super Bowl? As luck would have it, we are going to see a rematch. Funny enough, both of these two teams walking away and getting the win with 17 total points. So it's going to be the 3 seed Chiefs taking on the 1 seed Cowboys in the Super Bowl. Taking a look here at our Pro Bowl roster, Sam Howell continues to taunt us, making the Pro Bowl over Klein. We're going to have to take a look at his year with the Minnesota Vikings because it must have been absolutely special, just continuing to taunt us throughout this series. No Pro Bowlers so far, just continuing to look. Hunt getting into the Pro Bowl, so we officially have one. Okonkwo getting in for back-to-back years, so we have 2 now on the year. Wyatt Teller getting into the Pro Bowl with 7 sacks given up. I'm not going to complain about getting a Pro Bowler, but I'm kind of sitting back wondering if that was deserved. Cosme also getting in there, so that's 4 guys on the Pro Bowl roster. Taking a look here, Khalil Mack getting in as well, so we officially have 5. The D tackle spot, Deron Payne, make that 6, everybody. Continuing to look, Davis, that's 7. Emerson, that's 8. Continuing to look here, did we get anybody else? And no, we did not. But we had 8 guys in the Pro Bowl this year. My goodness, what a season. Nothing to be upset about in that department. So, taking a look, the Dallas Cowboys getting revenge from last year, and they ultimately win the Super Bowl. Dak Prescott and the Cowboys finally break the curse and they get it done. Dak Prescott not only wins Super Bowl MVP, he also wins MVP. Romero Gallo, the new head coach of the Jets, getting coach of the year. CeeDee Lamb won offensive player of the year, and Micah Parsons wins defensive player of the year. Just absolutely loading that. Brian Gaines from the Jets, and then Tyree Newhouse for the Texans. Those are the two guys collecting the offensive and defensive rookie. But back-to-back years, so the Chiefs getting there a ton. I think the Cowboys, no, pardon me, that was the 49ers and the Ravens. So yeah, Cowboys go back-to-back and go 1-for-1 against the Chiefs. Taking a look here at some of the retired players in the NFL, just go through each division. In the AFC North, anyone that you see there, Matthew Judon and George Fant, both retire from the Bengals. Basically, it seems like everyone on the Titans is going to retire, and then a few players there from the Jags, the AFC East, 3 players. Tyron Smith, again, I didn't really want to go after him because I knew he was just going to retire. Wasn't really going to help us all that much. Travis Kelce, he has officially retired after 13 years. So one of the Hall of Famers we're seeing go in, and maybe he's just going to start his movie career at this point. Andrew Norwell retires from the Bears. Ryan Jensen, Andy Dalton, Khalil Mack, Stephon Gilmore are all retiring from our team. So we're losing our sack leader in Khalil Mack. Stephon Gilmore was a great mentor for our squad. So right now we're going to have to look for essentially our new edge rusher on the opposite side of Moody, because it's going to be big. And then, a handful of players, Darius Slay and Lane Johnson, both retiring there. Tyler Lockett and Aaron Donald are both retiring. So two of some of the best defensive players in Mack and Aaron Donald both leave the league at the same year. Wow. But as we do, that is where we are going to leave this particular episode off here today, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I did. I will see you guys all back here tomorrow for yet another episode. Thanks again for hanging out. Make sure to like and subscribe. Peace.